Hello and welcome to another UC Today webinar, and we've got a particularly interesting topic today where we focus on interoperability. But first of all, I wanted to greet my expert guest today, Michael from Lifesize. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Very well, thanks. Thanks so much for joining me in this webinar. And the topic we wanted to explore is whether interoperability, which we'll come on to, is the key for enterprise success. And I know you guys at Lifesize, that it's a real key focus for you. But first of all, I wanted, if you would, just to explain, when we talk about interoperability within unified communications, what do we mean and how does it apply specifically to UC?
Well, I think that's a great question. When we talk about interoperability, what we mean is that whatever piece of hardware and software you're using to communicate with someone else, be that via video or via voice without video, or even there's many other modalities like chat and so on. But let's focus on video and voice for a second. It's the idea that whatever I'm using, whether it's my mobile phone or a tablet or a computer, and whatever software I'm using, whether it's just opening up a tab in a browser or a software application from some service provider like Lifesize, I should be able to talk to anyone. It shouldn't matter what piece of hardware they're using, mobile, tablet, computer, or what software they may have. They should have an easy way to come in and participate, just like you do with phone calls. If you think about your mobile phone and a phone in your home, if you still have a landline phone in your home, they can all talk to each other, and it doesn't matter whether you're in the UK or the US or Australia or Finland. There's a system of dialing that works globally, and irrespective of who makes the hardware and who runs the service, it all interoperates, and we don't have to think about it. So when we talk about it in unified communications, it's about the importance of that same concept, that anyone can talk to anyone from any device and any software anywhere.
Yeah, and we should say traditionally, we're talking about interoperability now, but I suppose that it hasn't been the case traditionally, especially with, let's take an example of video. Often, if you were in an enterprise and you had a probably very expensive video conferencing system installed, it would probably only be able to communicate with something of the same product, its sister effectively in another office. You weren't going to be intermingling with people that had different systems.
Yeah, I think it goes in cycles throughout communication technologies. There's times where there's great cooperation, collaboration across various providers in the market to ensure that everything works together well. And there's times that there are solutions that kind of go off on their own and they're an island and really can't talk to anything else. And it over the course of years and decades, it goes in waves, and it's not always consistent.
Absolutely. When you talk about some of those technologies, and now we're in the age of open standards and protocols and products like, well, platforms like WebRTC and SIP protocol as well, that really, how does that affect the progress of interoperability generally?
Well, generally, I mean, those are what you're talking about with WebRTC or SIP. These are communication protocols that are adopted by consortiums of corporations and as standards to ensure that technologies can work together. That's not their only purpose. You can have a consistent and standard way to develop. And in many cases with WebRTC, for example, you can have many other benefits, like doing things natively in the browser without having to install an application on your computer or your mobile phone at all. And you can accelerate development and innovation. So there's a lot of really important benefits to those technologies, not the least of which is interoperability.
Absolutely. And I suppose those enabling protocols, being able to standardize on systems and protocols, that is really crucial to interoperability. Without that, if everyone had picked their own different path to go down, we're effectively just migrating all off in different ways, and it's going to be very difficult for the enterprise to pick the right one to use.
That's absolutely true. And if you look back not too many years ago at all, I mean, if you go back even more than 5 years, it was very common that if I was a corporation and I was using, video conferencing from Lifesize, for example, even though all that equipment and any of the software that I'm running on my servers to run my video network is totally interoperable and standards based, I may be talking to a customer of mine or a supplier or a partner, and they use something else, and that solution may not be interoperable at all. And then there's the compounding problem with that of they may also really am not deployed in the way that it was designed to be used externally. So it was really complicated for me to talk to you. Like this kind of session, would have taken potentially 5 or 10 minutes just to set up, and potentially IT people, because there just hadn't been enablement around it. And I think there's a number of trends that are changing that. It's not just interoperability, it's moving to the cloud. And that's been a motion now for, the last 5 to 6 years, because that takes things outside of people's networks and makes them much more accessible. And then when you layer into that, interoperable standards being applied across providers, certainly that's the core of what we do, and enabling technologies like WebRTC that make things browser native. We're really in a golden age of communication, particularly for video, of making it accessible and easy for anyone without having to have a technical person, do all this optimization to make it possible. And that's what makes it powerful, because then I can use it just like I use a phone call with the same convenience. And I think that's the promise. We're there in certain pockets of the industry. Not everybody's there. And I think that's the opportunity.
You talk about interoperability being sort of at the core of what life sites do.
Yeah.
If you're a buyer, if you're from an enterprise and you're exploring different UC solutions across the spectrum of different communication methods, how can you tell if a vendor you might be exploring really embraces operability within their business, or it's maybe a bit more talk?
I think the biggest one to think about is whether it's whether it's part of the design from the beginning and just automatically, by default, part of everything someone does. If a vendor takes, service provider or hardware manufacturer takes interoperability seriously, it is the foundation that's built into everything, every device, every piece of software, into the core of their service, and that is obvious because they, without additional charge, without any complication or additional configuration, they will work with the software and services and hardware from other providers in the marketplace without you having to pay for additional service or software or hardware to make that work. And so that is pretty obvious. If there's additional charges, or you have to plan ahead, or you have to do something special, then interoperability is really not a priority, and you should think carefully about that.
Yeah, and I suppose once you've already leveraged potentially a large investment in a system that you hope is going to improve communication both internally and externally, the last thing you want to hear is, oh, well, actually, if you want to speak to customer XYZ, or you want to use this with some of your existing systems, you're going to have to buy this additional kit or additional piece of software to do that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of it comes down to flexibility and investment protection. And that's why interoperability matters, right? At the end of the day, for me as a business leader, I want to make sure that my team can be as productive and as effective as possible. And so I want to give them the best tools to do that. And in my experience, and obviously I'm biased in this, but I see the technologies and what's possible, video, and particularly really high quality video, is a much richer and more effective way to communicate it. And it lets people connect better, engage better, be more productive, and do it faster. So otherwise there's things I'd still get in my car or on the train or on an airplane to go do, because it just wouldn't be as engaging. If this session was just me on a phone call with you, it would be far less interesting and engaging, and we might not even do it. The other piece to it, though, is you don't, sort of there's a saying in sort of user interface design, which is don't make me think, right? Don't make me have to think about it. Well, if you set it up as a service provider, where if you choose a service provider as a business leader, where they make me have to have thought about it, pre-planned, paid in advance to be able to talk to something other than that service provider's software, then you're making not only me think, but all my users have to ask a question, which is, hey, if we're going to have this call today and have this conversation, is it going to work? Or do I have to go ask my IT department to pay for something so that I can have this call by you? Is there a toll booth across the internet effectively to make our technologies work? Or is it just open and I don't have to worry about it, and no one has to worry about it? And that is a big difference, and that drives effectiveness, but also and flexibility of how I use it and with whom, but also investment protection, because you know what? Then I don't have to worry about it. Whatever I use, whoever I use, whatever I buy, I know I can change a component of it. I can change the software provider and the service provider. I can change the hardware provider, and it's all just going to work. And that makes a huge difference in how companies invest.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned sort of the leadership within enterprises and organizations in general. If you do end up with a system that isn't interoperable and isn't going to play nicely with other technology systems from other vendors, what are some of the drawbacks of that? Is that a real potential problem, or can you just get along with just adding bits of your own system stuck to that particular vendor?
Well, you certainly can, and there's many customers and many service providers where people manage and cope through it. In some cases, they'll have multiple supported services, 3 or 4 in some cases across unified communications and video, and they're used situationally. Maybe it's one department or team only uses one technology, or maybe it's that for certain types of communications. All our external calls, we're going to use Lifesize. All of our internal calls, we're going to use something else. That's certainly possible, but I think in general, context switching and having to say if then as a person and think through, I just want to talk to you, or I just want to talk to Aaron, or I just want to talk to Sue, and I have to think about who they are, what they do, where they work, and which tool I can use that will work with them. It makes every person's job that much harder and makes them less productive. And generally, it makes it really hard to drive change in an organization and get people to adopt something better and more effective because they're having to think too much. And really, people just want to get their job done and not have to think about the technology. So we got to remove barriers. And I think that's the really important part. There are ways to bolt on gateways and to bolt on, interop packages and so on, but they involve making people think. And that's the challenge with them, that the customers just have to understand as they dive in, because often I see customers dive in without having thought that through, and then they get into a very frustrating corner and they don't know how to maneuver out of that corner. It's expensive or it's complicated, and it can lead to some suboptimal choices and experiences.
No, and as you mentioned as well, when you were talking about the user interface and the design for that, and the need for things to be simple, as much as that is obviously true, if people have to think about, as you said, I'll use this system to talk internally. If I have to call Michael at Lifesize, I'm going to have to use this. There's a huge loss in productivity and effectiveness of staff, isn't there? And ultimately, people are installing these UC systems to make their business processes more efficient. So if there then has to be a business process before the business process, it makes very little sense and removes a lot of the real benefit from that initial UC system in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, just think about for us, if we wanted to have a call today and we hadn't set it up this way, and we were using something like some chat technology or email technology. Let's use email, because email, there's a system that works no matter what computer or device or software we use where we can connect. So let's say we use that and we say we're going to talk today, and we're trying to, between us, negotiate how we talk. Well, imagine if we had to think about all the choices, and I mean all the choices. So I use an iPhone, you use an Android phone. What if they weren't compatible? Okay, well then second order, what if they are compatible, but I'm on the AT&T mobile network and you're on Virgin, and those aren't compatible. I can only talk to someone who's on a BT offering or someone else, for example. Then that's another thing we'd have to consider. Oh, then there's we don't want to do a voice call, just plain old voice call. We want to do something richer. So are we going to use FaceTime? No, we can't, because I'm on iPhone, you're on Android. Are we going to use Lifesize? Well, yeah, that'll work. Oh wait, but I don't have that. What if you had to say, well, what if we use I don't know, WhatsApp? Well, what if I don't have it installed? Oh, you've got the network layer of the service provider, you've got the hardware technology, you've got the software technology. The more people have to think about it, the more they say this is too hard, and they revert back to old habits, which tends to be email and chat, and then planes, trains, and automobiles for meetings, because they don't want to have to think and spend time, and that's why this is important.
Yeah, so we've established that potentially you could use a siloed system, but there are so many drawbacks. It makes a lot more sense to embrace an interoperable solution that can work for your organization internally and externally, and with as many different people as possible. So going forward, we're coming towards the end of 2019 now. You and I were talking before recording about how quickly 2019 has gone, and before we know it, we're going to be in 2020. So what do you think is going to make 2020 a particularly exciting year, especially when it comes to the capabilities of interoperability?
Well, I think, let's focus back in the beginning where you talked about WebRTC. I mean, this is a real-time communication protocol that's embedded in browsers, and it was led by Google within the Chrome browser, but it's gone from there into Firefox and Mozilla. More recently, Apple's incorporated it into Safari, both on Macs as well as on iPhones and iPads, and it's expanding from there. Microsoft's announced that they're rebuilding the Edge browser, which is native in Windows, to run on Chromium, which is the development kit for the Chrome browser, and run WebRTC natively, and that will be coming out in January. So if you look forward a bit, and then Android obviously runs Chrome natively, Chrome browser natively, and that's already WebRTC enabled. So if you think about it, we're almost at this point, but by January we will be, where it won't matter if you use a PC or a Mac, an Android or iOS phone or tablet, if you use the default browser of Safari on your Apple device or Chrome on your Android device, or Edge or Chrome or Firefox or anything on your Windows device, they will all be WebRTC enabled. And so what that means is, because WebRTC is at the core of everything we do as our communication standard and lifesize, service, software, hardware, and others are following suit, but that's really our development platform. What that means is I can make it so no matter what device you're on, no matter what your default browser is, no matter whether you have software installed from me or not, you can click on a link and be in a call with me. And I can do that today with a product we have called Lifesize Go. It's a free product. Go to lifesize.com. People can try it. You can call me from your Android phone just by clicking a link, and I can talk to you from my iPhone or my PC or my Mac just by clicking that same link. And as the only piece that's missing today is that Edge browser in Windows supporting WebRTC natively. And when that happens, which is roughly 60 days from now, the world changes, and it's been moving in this way for years. We're 5 years into this journey as a company. That's going to be a seminal event in making things tremendously easy, because you don't even have to install software then, no matter what you use. And that is where this gets so simple. And we've seen the benefits today, but it hasn't been for everyone because it wasn't native, it wasn't default in some technologies and some providers, and we're about to get there. So I think 2020 is going to be amazing from that standpoint.
Well, that standardization sounds incredibly exciting, and some of the capabilities that we'll be able to explore in terms of interoperable unified communications solutions. So, Michael, for the meantime, if some of the viewers of the webinar want to find out more about interoperability and how obviously you guys have invested in this early on in terms of WebRTC with Lifesize, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I'd suggest two things. One, we'll post links below, but and you can see those and click on those. One would be try go.lifesize.com. It's a free product, and it's completely browser-based, whether you're on an iPhone, iPad, Android tablet, Android smartphone, or a Mac computer. On a Windows computer, you can use Safari. You can use Firefox or Chrome, and in 2 months, it'll be using Edge natively. You don't have to install anything. You can invite people into video meetings. They click on a link, and they're in from any device. And soon, it truly will be any device with Edge on Windows. Try that out, because that gives you a sense of what a completely open, interoperable, easy to connect world is. And then we'll also provide additional information where you can go to learn more about interoperability and standards and WebRTC and how this is all coming together in the market, and the importance of that, as customers are making decisions about how they want to invest and how they want to enable their organization to be effective.
Excellent. Well, Michael, for the meantime, thank you so much for joining me in this webinar.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.